Our first session is about technology, the new media, and inequality. Dr. Russell Newman will be starting us off. He's assistant professor in digital media and culture at Emerson College, and he's a faculty associate at the Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society at Harvard. Let's get started. Russell, you'll be our first speaker. Start us off.
Oh, thank you very much. Can everyone hear me okay? Just a minute. Excellent. Well, first, many thanks to the organizers, and it's a real pleasure to be seeing you all here on a Saturday morning, particularly after the kind of term I have. Any number of us who have been living on Zoom for the last few weeks. Many props for showing up on Saturday for yet another Zoom conversation. I've been looking forward to this. So yeah, I'm an assistant professor at Emerson College. I find out in a week and a half if that turns into associate, so I'm on eggshells at the moment. But I've been working in the realm of media policy and communications policy for the better part of 20 years. And what I'd like to talk to you about today is encapsulated in my presentation that I am calling Media Reform and Policy Has Gotten Really Weird. I want to talk about three things in the course of this brief presentation. First, I want to talk about why media and communications policy affects you. Many folks don't even think about media and communications policy itself as one dimension they should care about amongst so many others that are occupying mind space right now. But I want to talk about why it does and how it does. Second, I want to talk about how all this is actually getting strange. Your entire media environment at the moment is starting to take odd turns that have huge ramifications for not just media makers that I teach here at Emerson College, but all of us in our day-to-day existences. And finally, third, I want to lay out why media consumption is just not simple anymore at all. You know what I'm talking about by the end of this presentation. So first, let's talk about how media policy and communications policy affects you. There's basically three things that media policy and communications policy does. First, it plays a determinative role in whether you have the most diverse sources of information available to you in the first place. Second, it plays a determinative role in terms of who will have access to new means of communication. And third, it determines what can I do in these with these means of communication, and almost even more importantly, who gets to determine what I can do via these means of communication. I mean, we live in kind of a moment of flux, what Robert McChesney would call a critical juncture. Back during the Obama administration, we passed a number of strong, what we called network neutrality rules for how the internet would work, which said whoever provided you internet access was not allowed to pick and choose for you what you could and could not access. They would not be allowed to speed up or arbitrarily slow down certain content that they would prefer you not to see in favor of perhaps one of their new corporate partners. Under the Trump administration, these rules were absolutely turned back, and not just turned back, but the FCC effectively abdicated its role of overseeing broadband communications at all. They effectively said, not only are we going to turn this back on the telecommunications and cable companies to determine what it is we can and cannot see. If they want to block something, all they have to do now is put it in the terms of service that they offer you, and it becomes legal. But beyond that, we don't even see our role anymore as overseeing how broadband operators operate. So this is brand new, and there have been certain efforts in the states, particularly in California, to try and return, at least at the level of the states, the kind of strong rules that the Obama administration passed. And these are under challenge, and there's a good chance that they will effectively be blocked or eliminated at the federal level anyway. Second, under the Obama administration, we instituted what would have gone into effect in 2017, strong privacy rules on the internet, so that your broadband providers would not be allowed to simply opt you in to store, collect, and sell your personal information. These rules, too, in 2017 were absolutely turned back, this time by an act of Congress that went as far as to use a procedure that said if the FCC, the FCC is not even allowed to approach this same question again in the way that it did. So even if we have a change of administration later on this year, if the FCC tries to adopt the same rules that applied before or would have started to go into effect in 2017, they're actually breaking the law in doing so, and someone could sue them away from being able to do so. So effectively, in your entire broadband universe, you don't have any privacy right now. Now, again, there are efforts in the States, California being a leader, to give you some of this control. And this at the moment, your own privacy law in California has gone into effect at the beginning of this year, but enforcement doesn't start till this summer. And how it will be enforced remains kind of an open question. And there have been many efforts to weaken these rules that you'll have to keep your eyes on as we go forward. All of this is happening in a broader set of wider media consolidation. You know, it's something that we've been paying attention to for years at places like Free Press and beyond, where I used to work. You pay attention to large content companies. This diagram comes from almost close to a decade ago, and we could observe how this has all changed over the last few years. And this has been a bipartisan effort. You know, many of these consolidations happened under Obama, another under Trump. So what? This is what the universe looked like at the beginning of the Trump administration. Since then, AT&T, another conduit, has taken over a massive content interest. Already there's one other conduit, Comcast, which owns a large content interest, but we weren't done there. At the same time, CBS and Viacom are finishing up their consolidation. Little chunks of News Corporation were split off, and 21st Century Fox was sold to Disney. So effectively, it was shocking in the early 80s when journalist Ben Bagdikian noted, no, there's about 50 companies that control much of what we see and hear and read every day. Now that has been winnowed down to basically 5. And even if you think you're getting your news and information from the internet and more, it has its sourcing probably from one of these 5 behemoths. So to this end, let's talk about why this has gotten weird, right? A couple of years back, Verizon decided we're going to purchase AOL, not so much for retro coolness value, but because AOL owned one of the largest advertising networks in the world, which means the AOL was essentially using cookies to track your movements across the internet. So they knew a great deal about users. So Verizon purchased AOL. They went another step further. Verizon decided we're going to purchase Yahoo as well, which similarly operated a large advertising network themselves. This has placed Verizon effectively in the middle of the advertising universe under a subunit of the company called Verizon Media, right? Where they're speaking with advertisers about all sorts of ways of partnering with them via data diversity, connected channels, brand safe integrations, quality inventory at scale of access to users across devices, even via other forms of partnerships, like when you mess up typing the name of a site in your address bar, Verizon can perhaps hijack your mistyped website to facilitate the distribution of ads, telling partners that, look, this is a win-win. You're assisting your users while creating a new revenue stream for yourself. We can figure out perhaps the general direction of what a user was looking for, and maybe you can help them get there with your own offering. And in fact, in late 2018, it was found that even while Google was sort of slowing down themselves, reading your emails for the purposes of selling you to advertisers, which really wasn't true, they were effectively handing the task over to third parties, Verizon was diving in with both feet, arguing, we are going to read your emails, and email's an expensive system. I think it's reasonable and ethical to expect the value exchange if you've got this mail service and there is advertising going on. So there's a reason why Amazon doesn't send you fully itemized receipts in your email. It's because they're offering free information to their competitors. I mean, some of the key questions of 2019 was a so-called identity crisis. And when telecommunications companies and advertisers and cable companies are talking about an identity crisis, they're talking about the ability to follow you as an individual across devices, across websites, on and off the internet. And certain parties like the Trade Desk have argued for the need for a unified cookie solution that everybody could read so as to follow individual users around the net. These companies here are all folks involved in the realms of ad tech, marketing tech, and more, who have all combined efforts to figure out how to find you individually so as to serve you ads. And the Advertising ID Consortium announces their own effort, and this was comprised of 3 main players. One was AppNexus, which operates its own advertising exchange where data sellers and data buyers come together to purchase information about us. The Index Exchange, which facilitates similar efforts, and LiveRamp, which tries to connect what you do offline with what you do online. You know, if we want to jump over to AT&T, they came along and spoiled the party later by acquiring themselves, AppNexus, putting them in the middle of the broader data gathering and advertising universe so as to form a modern media company, a stack of content, data, ad tech, and distribution. I'm checking over the chat here. Yeah, okay. Oh, okay, just noticing more people asking questions. That's great. So when AT&T decided to purchase Time Warner, you know, this gives an entirely new set of meaning to this particular transaction. I mean, purchasing Time Warner is about tracking you across content, targeting you across devices, and more. So make no mistake, your providers of broadband connectivity, which have the ability to determine where you can and cannot go and have certain interest in you seeing certain content and not others, are key players in the middle of the advertising universe, but also the industrial universe. Yeah, so when we talk about, we'll talk about that in a second, but this comes from a British report from early last year speaking to platform competition, and they note that amongst the advertising behemoths online, Google and Facebook gobble up about 2/3 of every digital advertising dollar. Verizon was certainly a player in the mix. And while in early 2019, analysts were noting that Verizon was not quite gaining so much market share, the critique of Verizon was, even though you're reading your emails and instituting all these other efforts to follow you across the web, they still weren't being nearly invasive enough. So where Verizon also shines, they're not shy about noting their partnerships. They're working in construction, education, energy utilities. They're acting as mediators for the flow of data, not just within advertising, but also in industrial internets of things, in business-to-business communications, and beyond, right? All with this comes from their State of the Market, the Internet of Things 2017, noting given where they sit in broader data and value chains, something you do sitting at your computer reading a New York Times story, once that is known about you, that data, that metadata about what you are actually consuming right now can be fed right up all sorts of industrial chains to perhaps inform the color of the shoes that maybe you will purchase going down the line. And make no mistake, even the large advertising conglomerates around the globe are noticing, they're getting a little bit worried that broadband providers themselves, alongside the Googles and Facebooks of the world, are acquiring so much data information about us that they're making huge purchases themselves. Publicis, which is one of the 4 large global giant advertising companies, purchased Epsilon in a $4.4 billion deal recently. Epsilon is a huge data collection company as well. And perhaps even more significant, advertising giant IPG, another one of the big 4, purchased Acxiom in the course of the last 2 years. Again, everyone seeking access to more and more information about you individually. So how this becomes weird and ways we need to kind of rethink media policy going forward and even digital life going forward. Yeah, media consumption is not simple at all anymore. Right? We need to think about media consumption as serving its classic liberal end of informing ourselves, some escape and more. But the functions to which media consumption is being put go much, much further, extending to the color of a car, perhaps, that might get created, organizing broader industrial networks, more. So media consumption itself, the notion of how do we regulate this, how do we establish rules to create a truly democratic environment, have a lot more to consider in ways that we'll certainly talk about more going forward in the course of the day. So thank you for that. I think I kept the time, and I'm looking forward to hearing from our other presenters.
You do well, Russ. Thank you very much. So a collective hand for us. Absolutely. Well done.